Hey everybody, I want to talk about a product and platform that I absolutely love and our latest sponsor, Interseller, the prospecting and outreach platform of choice for recruiters and sellers. Whether you're doubling down on business development or recruiting talent, Interseller does all the heavy lifting of finding contact data, automating the email and follow-up process, and syncs all that rich data into 20 plus CRM and ATS platforms. Reach out now and get going on a 2-week free trial and let them know you heard about it from Adam on the podcast today. Check out the link on the website. Appreciate it.
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast where I bring you the best and the brightest from the world of business, marketing, and personal growth to help you harness your inner tenacity to drive your career forward. I'm excited to welcome my guest today, Zach Nadler, co-founder and CEO of VaynerSpeakers, and he has built a career helping luminaries share their stories of impact and inspiration. With longtime client and now partner Gary Vaynerchuk, Nadler founded VaynerSpeakers in 2018, and he represents best-selling authors, entrepreneurs, CEOs, thought leaders, and tastemakers, negotiating innovative deals for his clients on stages and screens, well, more screens these days, and we'll get to that, around the world. And previously, he spent over 9 years serving as leading client agent at the speakers department at CAA, working the world's most recognizable talent. And his 14-year career spans back to memorable events, including the 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing. We're going to talk about that, what it's like to work with Gary V, and a whole lot more. Zach, let's do this.
Awesome. Looking forward to this.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. So let's start here. I don't want to bring my tribe up to speed. The podcast is about career journeys because people are probably like, how the heck did he go from high school, middle school? Now all of a sudden he's working with Gary V. How does that all happen here? But let's really talk about, in college. I mean, I feel like, did you always know that you were going to get into this world of sports and celebrity? I mean, you studied sports management at NYU. Was it always in your blood?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think everyone has like a passion. I was 5'10" in 7th grade, and I was like, great, I'll be a basketball player. And then, I'm still 5'10". So I realized pretty quickly, like that wasn't going to happen. And those who can't teach or represent. So I kind of pursued this, but in college, it's kind of something where I studied sports management. Everyone wanted to be an agent or running a sports team. There aren't that many opportunities to do so. But I think it's myself and one other person who actually wound up being sports agents at the end of the day from that program. And, not a lot of people wind up saying they want to be speakers agents per se, but it's a different part of the industry, and it's still a huge part of the industry. So it wasn't exactly what I set out to do, but I knew I wanted to be working with talent or working in sports in some way, shape, or form. I just thought I'd be running the Patriots by now.
Oh, interesting. And how much did the movie Jerry Maguire really kind of put that spark in you, or didn't?
I would say it actually didn't put the spark in me. I knew I actually thought coaching would be a place I wanted to go, but you don't see a lot of people my size on the sidelines, especially 20 years ago. Theo Epstein kind of made it possible for people to think that a 30-year-old could be running a sports franchise. But even then, there's 120 professional sports franchises in the 4 major sports. So it wasn't realistic, but Jerry Maguire was a great thing for my mom to be able to explain to people what I did until Entourage came around, and then I was Ari Gold in her mind. And, it's just a way of helping people understand what exactly I do.
Interesting. So Ari Gold, what the hell's his name in Entourage? I'm literally drawing a blank right here.
Oh no, that's his name in Entourage. Jeremy Piven.
Jeremy Piven, Ari Gold. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Right. Versus Jerry Maguire. Who's a better agent? Who's a better agent in your mind?
Different agents. As long as you're working for your clients, you're a good agent. Jerry Maguire, I think, was pretty idealistic. Ari Gold, I think, had tactics I wouldn't necessarily say I agree with, but he always did have his client's best interest at heart. So, some agents, this is a podcast, excuse me. I guess we could swear some agents are assholes. That's a part of the job, but that's not the main part of the job.
No, not at all. I mean, it's a podcast. You could say whatever you want on here. It's so interesting. Tactics. And we talk about that all the time. It's the how, right? Everyone talks about the why, the Simon Sinek why and everything, but it's the how. how you go about things. How do you live your life? Always, I think Gary even says it, doing the right thing is the right thing every time. It's something that I live by, something he lives by. But I want to take a step back before we go forward here. And you started out working in the golf and hospitality industry.
Yeah.
Are you a golfer? Like, do you love golf? Like,
Nope.
how'd you fall into that? I know I'm my dad's disappointment when it comes to golf. I'm working on it, but
Well, it's tough living in the city in Manhattan here. It's like an 8-hour day if you're going to play a round of golf, and it's miserable. So I am not a golfer. I tried for a little bit around that job because I was getting free golf balls, and I felt like the least I could do is put them in some water hazard somewhere. But no, I didn't really know. It was something where it was a cool opportunity. I was 18 years old. It was a small company, and I could pursue pretty much every part of the company. So they needed help across the board, and I was able to do everything. So, 10 weeks a year, I was on the road 4 or 5 days traveling with my childhood idols, right? Pro Bowl football players, all-stars from the NBA, Major League Baseball, actors, entertainers, musicians, politicians. It was the coolest thing ever. Now the hours are things I couldn't do now, right? Waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be on a golf course is not something that, I desire to do now. But back then it was fun. It was amazing. So I didn't necessarily know I'd be in golf, but it certainly was a lot of fun.
Do you remember the first time you were starstruck?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because that actually changed things for me because the starstruck nature of it, when you're around celebrities after a while, you kind of lose it. But there are certain moments, there are certain people where you're just always going to be starstruck.
They're heroes. When you're in front of your hero,
I had a voicemail from Bo Jackson, I was standing at the bank, and that was like a moment where like I dropped my phone, right?
Is Bo Jackson arguably one of the best athletes in the history of sports?
Yeah, I mean, pure athlete. His injuries hurt his career, but pure athlete, absolutely. I mean, he's like who's
one of the few multi-sport, but truly successful. Even Michael Jordan was not a great baseball player, right? It's really hard, really, really hard to do. So, you do the golf thing for a number of years. CA, I mean, people in the industry know it's best in class. How was it always on your radar, CA? Like, how did you get in there?
No. So it's funny. I had an opportunity to interview for a job at CAA, and it was going to be moving out to LA. It wasn't going to be working in sports, and at the time, that was what I wanted to do. So I didn't even pursue it. I had no idea, and the company grew quite a bit from that opportunity to when I started there. But I got recruited in because I had this background in sports. I was based here in New York. I was doing speaking deals, and I was doing some deals with CAA. So they asked me to come in and help grow the department, and it was small. There were 6 of us when I started. By the time I left, I think there were 23 or 24 of us. So it was an entirely different group, but it was something where it was a really great opportunity because I was able to work with, literally hundreds of different celebrities and speakers from across the board, entrepreneurs, chefs, athletes, musicians, directors, video game creators, you name it. I was able to kind of work with them. So I really was able to see a lot of the entertainment world. And there aren't a lot of places that offer that kind of exposure.
No, it's unbelievable. And going back to those early days in the industry, was there like one big lesson you learned the hard way? And I mean, we all have these, right? We all make this mistake, this misstep. We embarrass ourselves, especially in front of clients or someone, pretty important. Like, was there one where you're like, oh my God, I really haven't told anyone this story, but I'm so embarrassed. But you know what? It's been 15 years. I'm gonna let it all out on the podcast right now.
Just one is hard to say. I think, when you're a young agent, and I was 24 when I started as an agent, which is one of the youngest to come into that company. And it's a lot of things, right? And I think you have to learn fast. So my dad always told me CYA, right? Cover your ass, and I think one of the lessons I learned pretty early was, get it in writing. Just because you have a relationship with someone, they tell you they're going to do something. If you don't have it in writing, you can't prove it. And so there were plenty of times where I was put in a position where I was telling a client something based on a relationship, but it didn't come to fruition. And frankly, I rather the relationship with the client than with the customer, because that's who I'm representing. That's who I'm responsible for. So I learned that pretty quick. But I got to tell you, once you make a big screw up like that with an A-level celebrity, you don't do it again.
Oh, you learn your lesson pretty quickly. And let's talk a little bit about these deals. And you've evolved your negotiating tactics. You've evolved your kind of out of the box thinking to really innovate there. But how do you find that balance that works for the talent, the client, the brand, the partnership? Is there a secret sauce? Is there like a go-to kind of check down list in your head to make sure that everyone's happy?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound kind of silly when I say it, but the secret is just be honest, right? The more you try to, shade around the edges, the more you try to get creative with the lies, you're going to get caught. And it's also something where, look, the truth comes out eventually. So I always find that when you're honest with people on both sides of the negotiating table, you're going to get a deal done much faster. And then everyone's going to be happy with the deal, right? If everyone knows what's on the table, if everyone knows what's being negotiated and what's possible, they're more willing to compromise if there's a compromise that needs to be made. But I also find that if you're not honest, the deal winds up taking 10, 20 times more work because you're then having to fix problems down the road. I'd much rather attack 100%. It. And if a deal doesn't happen every now and then, so be it.
Oh man, do you have any regrets about the big deals that could have been? How do you deal with regrets? And we don't have to dig into those deals that fell apart, but I think a really important lesson for folks early in their career, especially if they're in any type of sales or partnership, is how to deal with the no's and how to deal with the rejection. How did you build up that fortitude inside to deal with no's and rejections?
Reps, right? I mean, like you know this probably right? Well too,
yeah.
Right? When you're in sales and when you're a young person in sales, you hear no a lot. And I think over time, you kind of figure out that it's just part of it. You can't take it personally. And you can't look at it as a regret. Because I think once you start dwelling on regrets, you're already losing because it's going to affect the way you react and the way you respond. So I always look at it as you got to, accept the defeat, look at it and try and learn from it. Is there something you could have done differently or something you could do to save it? But then move on and figure out, it's, one of my clients writes a lot about Stoic philosophy. And the message I always pull from that is it's not what happens to you, it's how you respond. So, if you make a mistake, learn from it. If somebody does something you can't control it. And you can only worry about what you can control. And then you got to figure out what you're going to do next.
100%. And that's been a tough lesson for me. I mean, I just turned 42 and I look back at that all the time. Being able to let go of things that you can't control. I think that's mm-hmm. incredibly difficult for so many people. So let's switch gears a little bit, and I want to bring you into my world here. What do you think is similar about booking talent versus talent recruitment? Like we're both in kind of like this. We're looking for the right talent. We're trying to find the right match. It's interesting. A lot of crossover here.
Yeah, well, I'm actually curious. I want to throw this back to you. What do you look for when you're trying to pair a company with an executive? Like, how do you go about that search?
Yeah, this is a great question. There's kind of a spidey sense that I have that a lot of great recruiters have, and I think you feel it too when you feel the match. Mm-hmm. I'm a natural connector, similar to you. That's my superpower. It's one of those things like in the Matrix, like I could see two people that I know that don't know each other, and I could see like a little blurb above their head and connect the dots there. But it's really when it comes to a company, you think about the word culture, and what a culture means to me is a fabric. It's a quilt made of different materials, different colors and everything. And what's going to make that fabric look the nicest, be the strongest, be the best that it can be. And I use that analogy a lot when I'm talking to candidates, because the last thing you want in any organization is everyone to look the same, everyone to act the same. So I look for different mindsets, different thoughts, different backgrounds, and how that really plays into what this company is trying to build. Does it align with their vibe? Does it align with their principles? And that's really the approach that I take. And there's no science to it. It's an art.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. And I think you use the analogy of the quilt. I always say it's like a puzzle, right? You're trying to find the piece that fits. So I look at it when somebody comes to me and says, we're doing this event. First off, you got to figure out what's the event, who's the audience, right? What do you want? What are you trying to get out of this, right? There's usually two kinds of speakers. People who are coming in and speaking endemically to your field or to who the audience is, or people are coming in for more of an entertainment approach. And then sometimes there's a little bit of both. And so I think you have to identify the needs you're trying to fill, just like you'd have to identify what's the position you're trying to fill. And then it's a matter of presenting options. But I always look at it, to me, it actually is fairly comparable, right? You want someone who is going to fit culturally, right? Yeah. You don't want to bring someone in who doesn't have good ethics if your company is built on ethics. Because what are they going to come in and actually teach your employees? What does that say about you as a company? So there's so much, I think, that actually is a crossover, because the same things that you look for in a candidate, when you're going to pay them a salary over the course of a year, same things you're looking for out of someone you're going to pay for an hour-long speech, right? It's just about managing what the expectations are, what the information they're going to present is, and that it's a fit with the company. And that's a hard thing to do sometimes, because I think some companies may be thinking of themselves a little bit differently than what their actual, what they actually stand for. So you got to kind of work them a little bit to figure out what that is and find the people that fit. And that's kind of where you say the spidey sense, like that's my job, is to know what the speakers are out there are talking about, who they represent, and kind of what the themes they can talk on. Oh, 100%. Boring speakers can be great for the right group.
Yeah. Depends on your audience. And you kind of, I want to ask you this, like, what's a process there for really like when you're trying to figure out, all right, you have an opportunity. I mean, let's just take, I mean, we'll get to it in a little bit. We'll take LinkedIn Talent Connect 2019. You know, I saw Gary on the lineup. I'm like, oh, well, I mean, listen, of course I know Gary, but it was interesting to see him hit the stage. And one of the first things he said, he goes, how many people here know who I am? And there was, I think, you know, like there was like thousands of people in the audience there, and less than a quarter of the people raised their hands. So then I'm like, interesting, right? Like, was he the right guess for that? But how do you kind of put that together?
Well, I always love that. And that's kind of one of the funny things about my world, right? You know, some of the biggest speakers are not household names. They can walk down the street and no one's going to notice them. But the people who know them are usually obsessed with them, right? That's just kind of the way it works in my world. So I think it's interesting, but I think, you know, that's an interesting event, right? Because they're looking for people to come in, and all of their speakers were great that year. That was 2019, I think, right?
Awesome. And yeah, it was the last one.
You know, everyone kind of comes in, and it's a puzzle, it's a quilt. You got to put the pieces together, because that's an event that brings in multiple speakers. So you don't want like 5 people all talking about the same thing and then contradicting one another. You want to find people who are going to complement one another. Exactly.
I was just about to say that, like thinking about it. I mean, I forgot who was on before and after Gary, but it was complimentary. I mean, Gary comes on a completely different energy than everybody else. No fanfare, just walks on the stage, and we know his routine there, versus somebody who sits down, they have the table, they have their drink ready, you know, the legs crossed, they're getting a little bit more academic. And that's the yin and yang. That's what I love about that. So enough about Gary. We'll get to him later. You've worked with a ton of talent creators, you know, across the spectrum, Grammy-winning musicians, CEOs, Fortune 500 companies, presidents, Nobel Prize recipients. Do you have a favorite, Zach? Do you have a favorite, not person, because I'm not going to do that to your clients.
Right, I appreciate that.
I'm going to ask you here, like, is there just a category that's near and dear to your heart that you just love working with and booking?
You know, it was interesting. At the early part of my career, it was people who, you know, people I knew. Right, because I would book people who I didn't necessarily like. I may not be a fan of this particular playwright, right? Because I'm not going to this Broadway show, but they could have a huge audience, right? And so I would book them, and I have all sorts of people like that. And the ones that would excite me were the actors, the celebrities that I knew. But over time, it's the people who were nice, the people who appreciated it, who put the time and energy in, and were a lot of fun on site for both me as well as for the customer. So it evolved over time, and I don't think there's any one category of people. But chefs can be a lot of fun, right? They're used to having fun. Who doesn't like to cook? So when they show up to a meeting with a pizza or a cake, like that's not a bad thing. But like, you know, there's some small, like Mel Brooks, right? When I got the chance to work with him,
wow,
that was amazing, right? But there's legends. Like
that's a legend right there.
Anyone's gonna love them. So it's hard to say that I'm so specific with my goals, but there are some really great people out there, and I think what's been the funnest part of my world is over the last 10, 15 years, the industry's changed. So, you know, 15 years ago, huge celebrities weren't doing speaking engagements. Nowadays they are, right? You want to book George Clooney, he's out there doing 1 or 2 events a year. There's an opportunity. So it's really a lot more attainable people than there ever have been.
How much is George Clooney for an hour?
He's not one of my clients, so I won't go on the record saying anything, but it's a lot more than most people make in a year.
Right. I mean, we're talking 7 figures to get George Clooney in an event.
No, but 6 figures, well into it.
Oh man, it's so funny too. I'm like, if I won the lottery, and I had this conversation with a buddy, we had a couple of drinks a few weeks ago, and we're talking about my show, and he's like, so if you won the lottery, would you still be doing your show? I'm like, absolutely, but I would have a crazy production budget. Literally, I would have like the full Howard Stern studio here, and I would be able to book, like, you could get who you want on the show, and I would make it like my fantasy baseball team. I would literally have a lineup of everybody that I've always wanted, and I would make nice charitable donations to them. But so let's switch gears. So let's talk about Gary. Right? It'd be fun. Let's sidebar that and come up with
we'll bring in an audience. I like that.
No. But I like this idea of a fantasy speaker league. We'll work on it. We'll workshop it there. Okay. How'd you get first connected with Gary?
So Gary was actually a client of CAA's when I got there, right? And this was 2009. So he just launched VaynerMedia. He was the wine guy on YouTube. Right. He was not Gary, right? That year, I think, was the year he put out Crush It, which kind of, I think, put him on the map a little bit, but he was still not who he is today by any means. And I love when you were talking about Talent Connect, you know, he doesn't do it as much as he used to, but before every speech, he would get on stage and ask, how many of you know me? And it was usually none, right? Or maybe it was 5%. And that would always give him a sense of, okay, this audience doesn't know me. I got to go into this. I got to give the credibility so that they'll listen to me at the end.
And who the hell is this guy, this underdressed
and
gentleman.
Go into a room full of, you know, of gray-haired people who, you know, have no idea what social media is in 2010.
I think
He
my
used to
nephew
ask how
knows
many of you
about
are
this,
on
Gary V.
yeah, he'd ask how many of you are on Facebook, right? Like, think about that. So it's evolved quite a bit. But, you know, Gary and I first connected. I remember it was actually a few blocks from where I live now, which is kind of funny. But we did an event, and it was the first time I met him, probably 2011, I think. I had booked him a few times before that, but I hadn't traveled to the events for one reason or another. But over time, we worked together more and more. He was in New York. I was in New York. I was really into his messaging. I think we had a similar like ideology when it comes to customer service and sales in terms of being upfront, being transparent, you know, leading with empathy. And I think these things kind of resonated, and we just kind of got each other. And I think more and more, he allowed me some freedom and flexibility to do things that other clients weren't as willing to do. Get creative with the deal structure, get creative with the financials, figure out ways to benefit him. You know, I take no credit for the career he's built. I mean, he's the one on stage, he's the one selling books. But he gave me a lot of chance to be different and do things differently, which is kind of how we came together to build VaynerSpeakers in the first place. We're like, it's a 50-year-old industry, no one's innovating. Let's try and disrupt this the way he's disrupted everything else.
Yeah, and one big takeaway that I got from Gary from my limited time even working with him, and I had an opportunity to sit on some sales meetings, which is a thing of beauty, to be in a meeting. And anybody who's ever worked at Vayner, like I'm dressed now. Like there's no dress code there. But when you go to a business meeting as an account executive, you're dressing the part for that client, except for Gary. He walks in with the hoodie and everything. But just to see him work as magic is a thing of beauty. But one of the things I learned is Gary's thinking outside the box when it comes to deals. It's not just linear when it comes to money transaction, but what else could be? What's the barter? What are the opportunities? What is the access? And I think that's a real key thing, because it's always a few steps ahead. It's a chess game. And that's something I learned from him. I'm assuming you took a lot of those key takeaways from the early days with Gary, even now.
Absolutely. No, 100%. And I think we still do that stuff. I think we still look at it and say, just because it's been a certain way doesn't mean it has to be a certain way. And one of the things I love, you know, I loved my time at CIA, but it was a big company structure with a lot of bureaucracy, and there were certain things you could or couldn't do. We have a lot more flexibility and freedom to kind of go outside the lines. You know, try new things, and you know, it's nice when your partner is your biggest client, because he can be your guinea pig sometimes. And someone like Gary, you know, I also use him as you know, someone who has great knowledge. He's one of the foremost speakers in the world. If I'm not asking him questions and trying to learn from him, I'm probably pretty stupid. So, you know, we try and push the limits where we can, but I think it's that same idea where it's not always about the dollars and cents, right? What are the other chess pieces that we can play with? How can we get
who's the audience? Who is he gonna be in front of a room of all biz dev prospects? Like, who's the audience that you're talking to here versus the cost of, you know, his fee there? I mean, it's kind of crazy. You mentioned something interesting about what you've learned from Gary, but what do you think Gary's learned from you?
Oh, wow. Outside of Patriots wins, you know, like how to you know, root for the right team. I don't know.
I can't even imagine. I mean,
I kept that from him for years.
He hates the Patriots. I mean, loathes. He even hated me as a Giant fan. I'm like, dude.
Yeah, I think I kept that from him.
I'm surprised he even works with you. I'm actually surprised that he still works with you. That says a lot about you.
He's on record as saying he wouldn't invest in a Patriots fan, so I think I'm the first. But I don't know. I mean, I think I wouldn't say he's necessarily learned things from me, but I think we've learned things together, right? I think we've tried to see what's possible, and it's also interesting because I mean, look, we both evolved as people, right? He didn't have kids when we started working together, right? The company itself is totally different. So it's something that is really, it's rather than the learnings, I look at how things have evolved. How have we really managed to do all this stuff together and grow the business?
Hey Tribe, quick break in the action to introduce you to one of my close podcast friends, Hala Taha, and her show, The Young and Profiting Podcast. She interviews the brightest minds in the world, like former spies on how to gain influence, billionaires on biohacking your body, and even celebrities like Matthew McConaughey on what it's really like behind the scenes. At Yap, they go deep. There's no fluff on this podcast, and Hala asks all the right questions. You can listen at youngandprofiting.com or search for Young and Profiting on Apple, Spotify, CastBox, or your favorite podcast app. Now, back to the action on the podcast. That's a great answer. I want to go back to a question that I forgot to ask, and it's okay to do this because it's my show.
Of course.
What happens when a speaker bombs, and how do you handle it? Tell us a story of.
Sure.
You don't have to name names. You could give like you could allude to a genre maybe.
Okay.
Because we need something here. Don't just keep it general. Give me a little something. There's a podcast.
So, there's all sorts of stuff I can tell you, but ultimately when a speaker bombs, right, it's in the eye of the beholder, right? So I had a client of mine who I worked with as much as any other speaker over a 10-year period, right? And I used to say about this person when I was on sales calls, and this wasn't just bullshit. I would literally say, if I was allowed to give a money back guarantee, I would give a money back guarantee on this person. They weren't the most expensive speaker, but I booked them more than anyone else. I was booking them. I would book them for a group, and then the group would say, great, we want him back next year, or we want to book him for our 3 other regions. He was the best. And I booked him for a great customer. Gary actually spoke at this same event the year before. And he comes off stage and they looked at me and they're like, he was terrible. I was like, terrible? Were you in the same room as me? And so when you talk about someone bombing, it's not always when someone actually bombs. It's when someone thinks that someone bombed. So it's shame on me because he probably wasn't right for that audience in the first place.
Well, that's
so it wasn't necessarily his fault. It was on me. And I think you got to take accountability, and it's my responsibility to make sure that the speaker is aware of what the group is looking for, that they can prepare accordingly, that they're on time. And, look, sometimes it just doesn't work out. There are also
someone
people who just
like an athlete.
Yeah, 100%. There are also people I just don't work with anymore because they're terrible, right? You learn pretty quickly when someone's bad. And sometimes it is in the eye of the beholder. Other times there's bad people, bad speakers, and you learn real fast. There's one person who will remain nameless, a very successful person in news, we'll say, who was actually sent home from a 2-day event after the first day.
Al Roker. I'm kidding. No, I love Al Roker.
Al Roker's a delight. It was not Al Roker.
Al Roker's story of sharding in the White House is still one of my favorite things I've ever heard. You know that one, right? The Al Roker sharding story. Google that afterwards. You might shard yourself. Hopefully not. And we don't want sharding here on the podcast area. But I digress, right? But you talked about something really interesting, which is preparation. Mm-hmm. How do you? I mean, listen, talent, our egos. There's different levels of talent there. But how do you ensure that the talent is prepared? How do you know that they're going to be ready to go for that? Now, you know that there's some speakers, this is their profession. They are professional speakers. They are literally like Broadway actors. They could go out there and just on the flip of a switch, but others need a little bit more work. Others have full-time gigs. This is not their full-time gig. How do you ensure that the quality, the products out there, that their product, how do you ensure that they're prepared and ready to go, especially for a specific or unique audience?
Well, I think it's something where we take pride in this, and we have a small roster, and that's intentional. When you're with a much larger roster, it's harder to know all your clients and know what makes them tick and how you're going to prepare each of them. I know all my clients. I know what they need to hear. So it's something where it's not a one size fits all. And I think that's something that we built a company on from the very beginning, is the idea that not every client's the same, not every event's the same. You can't treat them all the same. So what Gary needs to prepare for an event is very different from what Rachel Tipograph needs to prepare for an event, or John Henry needs to prepare for an event. And I
is there a real fire? Is there a real fire going on, or is that just an alarm? We're live, here? But I need to.
I got nothing on my end. I think.
That's me. That's me. And I'm trapped in my little room here. No, only Al Roker. No, I'm kidding. There, I digress for a moment here. So, we're good unless the fireman kicked down my door, which would make for some great live TV. Right? Exactly.
I hope not. I hope you're all right.
No, I think someone just hit the fire alarm here. It happens every so often. So you could hear that, right? That's how good these mics are.
Yeah, I got a fire extinguisher right here if you need, though.
Great. I actually have one. My dad was so funny when I got this new office. He's like such a dad. He's like, you got to go get a fire extinguisher, and I did. So hopefully I won't have to use it here. But I want to talk about.
My wife made fun of me. We actually just bought a house, and before we moved in, we're buying stuff on Black Friday, and I buy a plunger. I bought a fire extinguisher, and she was like, "You're a lunatic. We don't need these things yet."
Yeah, I think my wife said the same thing. So the pandemic's been absolutely insane, and it's affected all these. Every industry you can even think of: hospitality, tourism, speaking events, and this had to be this great pivot. And I can only imagine, if I did the numbers in my head, how much money even a Gary makes, knowing what his booking fees are, all the events. It's a huge income loss, and you're an agent, you're getting a percentage of that, whatever your structured deal is, and it's affecting your income. Talk to me. March 2020, shit hits the wall. It's a shit storm. What did you feel inside? Did your heart just drop?
Yeah, well, I mean, so we had. First off, let me set the stage for this, right? So
hold on. Here's what I'm going to do. You keep talking for a second. Tell the story. I'm going to stick my head out the door to make sure we're not burning down. Just keep talking. This is live TV. Just keep talking. Tell the story. Just stay with me here. Stay with it. We're live.
All right. So it's early February. I am getting excited because Gary's got a booking at the beginning of April. He's supposed to go to Las Vegas. He's supposed to do an event where he's not the only speaker. He's going to be there with Tom Brady, who's obviously means a lot to me as a Patriots fan. Now, The personal note here is that my firstborn was March 6th. She was due at the end of March. And I was like, I can't go to this event. I'm not going to be able to see Gary with Tom Brady at this event because I've got a baby coming up in March. So I'm already disappointed. But then in late February, the first event that gets canceled. So we're talking February 25th around then, and we have a canceled event, and that's just the beginning. I fly down to Miami. I've got Jesse Itzler doing 2 events back-to-back days. One of the 2 gets canceled. The second event has a drop in attendance. I fly back to New York. My daughter is born the next day, 3 weeks early, right? And then instead of paternity leave, I have triage where every event that I have on the books is getting postponed or canceled.
So you're dealing with it.
Absolute pandemonium.
Oh my God. I'm going to have to go back and rewind the last minute and a half before you said, but I caught Tom Brady and Gary in the same, they were going to be at the same event.
Right. They were supposed to be at the same event.
Were they going to arm wrestle?
They got canceled.
Were they going to arm wrestle?
No, they were just going to go on one after the next. But Gary said, as long as I got to make sure that I don't see Tom Brady. So only Gary would say that.
Wow. That's how much he hates him. Jesus, that's absolutely crazy. So the building's not burning down.
That's good to know. That was the first event that got canceled. We had hundreds of events that got canceled after that. Hundreds. Now, what's interesting is it's been a year. We now are at our pre-pandemic levels in terms of events happening. So because of virtual, you can have there are more events now than there were back then. Because
are fees going down?
Of course. The revenue is not the same as what it was. But look, Gary did 2. He's doing an event right now. Okay, Gary is live somewhere else. Had an event. We did another event this afternoon, and he's got one event tomorrow. So it's something where speakers are able to do more events, but it's certainly not the same. And for a while there, it was grim. Because look, Gary and I have been doing virtual events for years. The first one we did was back in 2012. We were ready for this. We've done virtual events for years in his office. Now, with the office closed, suddenly he's doing them on his own from a laptop. So it's a whole different ball game. But I think over time, people adjusted, right? It became the norm. And so it very quickly was something that people adapted to. We were ready for the adaptation. The problem was that not every event was. So it took some time to get over that. But now I think that everyone's done it at least once. They're figuring out like this is something that works. We have to figure out how to utilize this for the future. But does it work? I mean, like, let's think about that experience. There's a tremendous difference between me watching someone give a speech on my screen and I'm distracted. I'm looking at my phone. I'm looking at this versus the live in-person experience. And you could feel their energy. You could feel their enthusiasm and you're listening to them. It's 100%. Different. And it's a different world. And it's different also for a speaker to do what I'm doing here, even with nice lights and a good camera and everything, to speak into a screen instead of looking at the people and looking in their eyes. How do you ensure that same effect of that live experience, or how do you get as close to it as you can? Well, look, this is live right now, right? And this afternoon, Gary was speaking. There were 6 people in chairs in front of him, and that was an upgrade, right? That was an upgrade compared to what it could have been. Did it bring him back to his early days? I think he'd say he never spoke to a crowd that small. No, of course. But I think you're right. Look, there are some things that you can't replicate. There's no arguing that, right? But on the flip side, if you are based in Australia, in Indonesia, in Nairobi, in rural parts of France, now you can participate in a way that you couldn't before. So there's pros and cons to everything. I think the future is hybrid. I think the future is we're going to have a live event in person, and you can meet your neighbor, and you can take a meeting down at the bar or at breakfast the next day. But it is also we're going to have access to people who couldn't come before, and it's going to break down walls for people who maybe they can't travel. Maybe they're afraid of flying. Maybe they don't want to travel. Or maybe a company says, we're not going to spend the $2,000 it takes to send you to Dallas, but we'll spend the $300 to get you a ticket to this thing so you can learn. And I think the other thing is, not everyone learns the same way. So you talk about like, you're going to be, second screening it. I sit in the back of the audience when I watch speeches because I want to see how many heads are actually pointed up and how many are pointed down. So you got to pay attention to that. But a lot of people aren't watching even when they're there in person. Yeah, they're easily distracted. It's fascinating. It's also, we don't have enough data. We're still so early in this. We don't know what it's going to look like. I'm a big believer that it's going to be hybrid. I also believe that we're going to get back to more live stuff soon. There's vaccinations. I mean, I'm going to my first. We're not far off. I mean, I bought Med tickets a couple of weeks ago for a May game. I literally felt like I just bought Super Bowl tickets. Yeah. Like a Met game, something that I take for granted, like a freaking Met game that I usually buy the cheapest seats and walk down and sneak in. Now I'm talking to my friend for a random Thursday game. I'm like, we got to get the best seats. We're not going to be able to move. It's a completely different world. It's uncanny. I was watching part of the Red Sox game today in the background, and the pitcher steps off the mound, and the whole crowd started booing. And it was like, oh, I missed this. I didn't realize I needed the crowd. And I think events are the same way. We're already seeing there are live events happening in certain places. Some speakers are willing to, others aren't. There's safety measures being taken. This summer, I think you'll be able to have events. Now, I think people won't want to do that. I was in Central Park this weekend. It was beautiful out. There were people everywhere.
It was packed.
People want to be out. They want to be outside. They want to be with their friends, with their family. It's something that people are clamoring for. So I don't know that they're going to be dying to go to business conferences, but we're already seeing that this fall is going to be busy, and people are they have this pent up desire to be with one another, to congregate, to see that community that they missed. And so we're already seeing it. And I think that you're going to see the bounce back be just as strong. I'm already hearing from people who are telling me they're trying to hold events and they can't find venues. That's a great thing. I love hearing that.
That's a really good problem to have. So you're optimistic. I mean, you have to be. I think we're going to get there. This has been a bump on the road. But what you personally, like, what have you learned about yourself from COVID? How you've responded, reacted?
It's a lot. I mean, again, mind you, I had a baby 5 days before the New York City quarantined. So I think there were things that I was going to learn anyways the hard way. But I think it's really the value of time, how to manage your time properly. It's always been something that I've been, I move real fast. I try to be as efficient as possible so that when I'm not working, I can be as lazy as possible.
I like that.
But it's something where
my guy.
you got to figure out how to make it work. And I think you also got to figure out who you can trust. I try to empower my employees to go the extra mile, because it's, especially in this world, we're used to talking to one another. We're used to, tapping people on the shoulders, and you can't do that. And so it's an adjustment. And I think we all figured out how to make it work. You have to do that with distractions, and there are certain pros and cons to working from home. But I think you have to figure it out in your own ways. I think I was lucky because I'd worked from home for 2 other jobs previously. So I kind of avoided some pitfalls because I've done it before. Not everyone had that benefit, but I think you just got to figure out how to manage the distractions. And that was something I learned pretty early on. It was like, you gotta manage these things, because if you don't, you're just going to get buried. And the work doesn't slow down because we're working at home, right? Events, I shouldn't say that. It was pretty slow in April and May.
Yeah,
but once we got back, I was going to say it's about as busy as I've ever been, because the virtual events take twice as much work as an in-person event, right? It's a new ground. It's animation. You can do anything, right? I keep joking it's animation because it's like there's no rules of physics. I can stream from here. I can also be in a hotel room in Prague. It doesn't matter where I am.
It doesn't matter.
There's all sorts of things that can change. So, it's adaptability. It's really what it's all about.
What's the coolest thing you've seen, like, from an innovation standpoint? Like, I've seen like really cool, like, virtual experiences as far as like lobbies and networking. And I said to one of my buddies, it's kind of like an online poker game where there's different tables and dealers and you're kind of moving around there. But what have you seen? Is there a talk about hologram Gary? Like, what have we seen that's just been like mind-boggling to you?
Well, there's 2 things that come up. I mean, first off, we've seen everything, especially in the early days of the pandemic. Anyone who had any sort of virtual reality, AI type, presentation, stuff was coming our way, whether it was a platform or, a streaming service. We saw it all. And frankly, they were all very similar. There wasn't a lot that separated them, or they were cost prohibitive. But you talk about poker. There's a group I work with, a production company out of London. Shout out to my guys at EMC3. They put together an amazing program where it was poker. You could Zoom with people. You could play poker, and it was hundreds of people, so that when you elevate off a table, you go and join other people at other tables. And they had to develop that from the ground up. There's also a group I work with out of Romania. I'll give a shout out to Avi from Brand Emotion, and Brand Minds. They put together something where it kind of looked like Sports Center. Gary was on a screen, right? And it looked like the host was in like the Sports Center studio talking to Gary up on a screen. And Gary was talking to the host. But the way they had the camera set up and the green screens, it was really beautifully done. And it costs money to do this, but you can do it. The other side is this production value. I can assure you, Adam, you're spending money on this. There's no doubt. But compared to what it would have cost you 5 years ago, it's night and day. And so the fact that you can do this, the fact that anyone can do it nice enough, we have a lower barrier for entry. People are used to it. And I think that that's been one of the biggest wins of this, is that we all kind of have a appreciation for production value, but we also realize you don't lose that much if you're not spending $1 million on a production budget.
There's a balance here. So I assume you have a boy or a girl?
I have a girl, Lila.
I love that name. Just turned 1, close to 1?
Just turned 1.
What has been the biggest surprise about it? It's great to talk to new parents. I have an 8.5-year-old daughter, 2.5-year-old son. like something that you thought like, and I always tell new parents, I go, the greatest piece of advice I give people is to not take advice from anybody else about parenting because everyone has their own experience. But what is something that you kind of thought about being a father that was going to happen that maybe hasn't, or something that, just, I never expected this. I never expected this in my wildest dreams when I had a kid.
It's a great question. I mean, I think I have been pleasantly surprised by how much I can do with very little sleep. Going back to my days of waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning for a golf tournament, I guess maybe I got some training in there. But
Mm.
I mean, I think it's really just the joy. Like you try to enjoy every minute of it, but the way that she smiles at literally anything, a box, a roll of paper towels is just like the coolest thing. It gives you an appreciation for things, and I think it makes you kind of slow down and see what's really going on. And especially in this virtual world, like when the walls were coming down around us, when events were canceling left and right, and we were trying to navigate this world. At the end of the day, I was like, well, this is why I'm doing it. And it's not all that bad. We'll figure it out, right? There's things in this world, and look, last summer was dark times. Last spring was really scary,
We didn't
right?
know.
And around the globe, we had no idea what was going to happen. And so that to kind of slow down, see a smile changes a lot. So I think the perspective it gave me really, matured me in a lot of different ways.
Does it give you, I mean, I think about this all the time. My daughter's going to remember this time. My 2.5-year-old son is never going to remember any of this. We're going to go back and we're going to tell the stories of the pandemic, the plagues. It's so funny. We just had Passover. I'm like, we're literally in one of the plagues. This is a freaking plague. Like the Bible, like you used to think of the Bible as something, thousands and thousands of years ago. Holy shit. And then all of a sudden the summer's going to come and we're going to have the cicadas and you're like, okay, plague, locust. And you're like, uh-oh. And then they talk about the firstborn. I'm like, no. We're not getting into that one. It's incredible. I mean, parenthood definitely gives you such a unique perspective, and I think that's the moment everything changes. And for me, I always say, like, the second my daughter came into this world, that's when everything in this world stopped being about me, and it became her. And that was a fundamental shift in everything that I do, and why I built this company, and why I do everything that I have. Before we get to kind of the encore here, let's talk about music. You're a huge vinyl collector.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, like, do you go cross genres? Are you just a general collector,
Oh,
or
yeah.
is there a specific? Do you have anything?
No, I mean,
is it
I'm
a rarity thing?
I like old stuff. I mean, my wife and I, one of the very first things we bonded on was a love for kind of classic rock, 60s and 70s music. I was telling you, we just bought this house up in Woodstock, New York, right? Literally 15 minutes from where our favorite band was playing in the 70s. So we love that kind of stuff. And the fact that my wife had a vinyl collection too.
Who's that?
The band?
The band.
Literally
Yeah.
the band. Yeah. They play with Bob Dylan. And, my wife had a vinyl collection when we first got together. And it was like, okay, I like this. I see where this is going. But yeah, I mean, I love, look, my personal stuff. I love like early British, blues rock. But I think the coolest part about collecting vinyls, because I don't listen to a whole lot of current music. So I like finding out new old music, right? Like, who did Led Zeppelin listen to? Right?
Like you go on deep tracks on Sirius XM, deep tracks. That's some great stuff.
I tried going deep on kind of who my favorite bands appreciated, and then I listen to them. Half the time it's terrible, right? Some of these bands from the 40s and 50s. Yeah, but if you kind of figure it out, you can kind of hear your band in their band. And so it becomes really fun. So I listen to it all.
Yeah, it's fascinating. That's a great perspective too, to see what their musical influences are. But what is that prize vinyl that you have? What is like your right? Like, what is that like? This is my prized possession.
So I haven't bought it yet because I refuse to pay like the $400 or whatever it's gonna cost on eBay. I'm a searcher, so I have to find the vinyl. I'm not just gonna go buy it online.
That's part of the fun.
So I'm looking for Nick Drake's Pink Moon. It's a beautiful album. It's a hard one to find. It's a rare one. But the one I have, I think, is Music from Big Pink by the band, which is, again, a house that's 15 minutes from where I now own a house. So it's a piece of pride for me.
You been to Stella's up there?
No, I don't know Stella's.
In Woodstock?
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, we were up there a couple weeks ago. It was awesome. Like, nice. Literally, it was just phenomenal. Like, blown away. And it's beautiful there. But we digress here. So let's bring it home here. You listened to a couple episodes, which I certainly appreciate. And for me, it's my masterclass. It's how I learn. It's my osmosis. Zach, what is the single greatest piece of advice you've ever received that you take action on every single day of your life?
So I had I love this question, by the way. And growing up, like you asked me before, I was really into sports, but I was a musician, right? I played, multiple instruments growing up. And we had the leader of our orchestra and our band at my high school is this very well-known person in the field. And he would always tell us, Mr. Busey would always say, if you're going to make a mistake, make it loud. Because the idea was, if you're being timid, you're not giving your 100%. So I really kind of take that to heart. And you say every day, it's really how you got to live your life, right? If you're going to make mistakes, if you're going to do things the right way, either way, you got to be loud. You got to, do it with conviction. And so it was something that, he would drill it into you. And if you made a small mistake, he was like, no, I want you to make it as loud as possible. So that is something that I definitely live every single day of my life.
Wow. That's a good one. I try to make my mistakes pretty loud. And then if my wife catches me, I try to cover it up there. You've had a ton of success and the future is bright, man. But like, if you could put your finger on one, Zach Nadler, this was the greatest professional success that I've had to date, what would it be?
Oh, wow. My greatest professional success to date. I hope I haven't gotten there yet. I keep saying, and I'll put it on record here. I tell Gary, we're going to be, we're going to sell out Madison Square Garden one day. So let's.
Well, if he's opening for Kevin Hart.
Look, there's not a lot of people who have done it. So I keep saying that's what we're going to do one day. And it's not even on our radar. We're not planning it by any means. I just like having, this is like Gary saying he wants to buy the Jets. I want to have him headline Madison Square Garden. Let's do it.
I don't think that's too far out of reach.
No. Well, maybe right now, because I don't think anyone is. I mean, maybe a sellout at Madison Square Garden now is probably like 1,800 people, so I could cheat. That's not really.
Sell out Citi Field at 8,500. I think we can manage. I think we would manage that one. And we talked about the silver lining, so I'm never going to ask that one. But I do want to know, what is that superpower? What does Zach Nadler do better than almost anyone in this universe that makes you who you are?
I mean, I move quick, right? I make fast decisions. I do a lot of things in a short period of time. Again, I try to be as efficient as possible, but I think it's I don't know if it's a superpower so much as just something I'm really good at, but I've been able to figure out how to kind of move and groove at a really high speed. And thankfully things don't get lost in between. So it's a matter of kind of focusing on those details and then bouncing from one thing to the next and just knocking them out.
Action over perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Forward progress, my friend. And last but not least, you look back on your career, you look back on those early days, you look back on some of those early mistakes. Maybe there's times when you question, am I going down the right path? Do I know what I'm doing here? Some self-doubt. And you had to reach down deep inside and harness that inner tenacity to pull you up. And right now, looking back, you got through COVID. We're working through this. You thought your career and everything that you worked for might have been down the tubes, literally down the toilet. And you're looking back and you're looking at your beautiful family, your daughter, the house you just bought, the success you have, and you want to show gratitude. Zach Nadler, what is your compass? What is your North Star?
So this was a question, like you said, I'd listened to your podcast. I was thinking a lot about this because I've done a lot. I was working like really hard as a young person, right? In my teenage years, right? And what was it that kept driving me? And what I kept coming back to was, it's not any one thing other than the idea of ambition. I've never been someone who needed external motivation. I've always just been pointed and laser focused and I get it done. And so I think that the idea of ambition, right? If you look at what I do for a living, right? Speaking engagements doesn't end. It's not like I book Gary once and then he's like, great, I'm satisfied. That's that, right? It's not like it's 50 times a year and then great. What about next year? It's a never ending field. And I feel like it's no surprise that I landed here, right? You work with an athlete. Okay. So they have 15-year career. Maybe they're getting 3-4 contracts out of that, right? That's great. You could be successful and that can be the whole business. For us, it's more. It's what's next. It's how do we keep every client happy? How do we get more clients? How do we do more events? How are our customers as happy as possible? And so I'm just always kind of never satisfied. I think, it's maybe I have a tapeworm. I don't know, that part of my brain.
Insatiable.
I just need to keep doing more. Right? I keep growing, keep adding. I was never satisfied. I've never had a year where I did less business than the year before. And I want to keep that streak going forever.
I love it, man. Zach, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. I appreciate you. Where could folks find you? Where could they connect with you? Where could they learn more?
Yeah, look, you can follow me everywhere at Zach Nadler on all platforms, but it's probably not going to be as much fun unless you want to see my dog and baby. VaynerSpeakers is really where the good stuff is. You'll see all my clients, all the stuff we're working on, and we got a few tricks up our sleeves, so stay tuned.
Yes, we love it. Awesome. And everyone who's joining us in the live stream, we'll get to it. If anyone has any questions, we'll get to that in one moment. Zach, I appreciate you. Thank you for spending time with us today. Everyone listening at home, I thank you for spending time with us as always. If you love what you heard today, please leave a review, rating. It goes a long way. Share it. Sharing means caring. Remember, take care of each other. Stay 6 feet apart. Catch us more at thepodcast.com. And we'll see you next week for another great episode. Take care.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search The Podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.